Hello, everyone. Welcome to Advanced Tools for Personalizing Client Programs, TLP Pro, and Custom Playlist Programming Rationale for ABT Providers. I'm Alex Doman, founder and CEO of Advanced Brain Technologies, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome my friend and longtime colleague, Sheila Allen. She's an ABT Scientific Advisory Board member, adjunct faculty member, and co-creator of In Time, amongst many other things. Welcome, Sheila.
Hi, very happy to be here doing this tonight.
Great to have you. So for all of you joining us, this webinar is going to run about an hour long, and then we're going to stay after as long as we need to for a Q&A session. So as we're going along tonight and you have questions, just jot those down, and when we get to the end, you'll be able to type a question into the Q&A option on the bottom of your screen, and then Sheila and I will be here to answer those questions for you. So this year has had some really big additions to the Advanced Brain Technologies family of products, including the new TLP Pro and custom playlists. These new tools were created to help providers give clients the best possible listening outcomes and to help you achieve better results also in less time. This webinar is intended for our providers and other interested professionals that might be considering working with ABT to really give you a further understanding of TLP Pro and custom playlists. So tonight we're going to be giving you an overview of TLP Pro as well as custom playlists, and we're going to do a terminology review of the ABT lexicon just to give us a level set of different terms that we're going to be using tonight. We're going to discuss how to incorporate TLP Pro and custom playlists into your practice, both clinically and for at-home programs. We're going to discuss how to create a listening program path for best client outcomes, how to apply the frequency zone framework for advanced programming, and we're also going to give you some examples of common program paths and selection rationale and get into some advanced programming ideas tonight. So let's step back and just take a little bit of history about program delivery of TLP. When the programs first came out, the technology was compact disc, and then we evolved to the iPod Nano, and then TLP Online with the TLP mobile app, and now we're using the iPod Touch. So for program delivery today, our options are TLP Online with the mobile app and the iPod Touch with either a Pro system or a custom playlist. So that's currently what's available when you're ordering listening systems. And with the iPod Touch, you now have pretty much the entire ABT music content library on one device, which is very exciting. That's something we couldn't do with the Nano, but we can do with the Touch because of its enhanced memory capacity. So let's start at a very high level to help you understand what TLP Pro is and what TLP custom playlists are. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you now. And we're going to take a quick tour of TLP Pro. Okay. So TLP Pro. So this is pretty much the entire ABT music library loaded onto a portable iPod Touch listening system. And it's very unique because it offers the 4 core programs, TLP Spectrum, Achieve, Level 1, which now includes Level 1 with Nature. It also has In Time. Then for our supportive programs, we have the TLP Specialized Albums, all of the Sound Health Collection, as well as the Music for Babies collection, and Sleep Genius. So it's a very comprehensive system that also comes with an unlimited site license. So we really designed the TLP Pro system for in-clinic use by our providers. So if you're working with multiple clients, it's a way to keep your systems organized without having all the different programs on different iPods. So that headache is gone. And with the unlimited user site license, you have the option to work with as many clients as you like within your practice, and you don't have to worry about keeping track of a bunch of equipment. As a standard, the TLP Pro system comes with waves because that's going to give us our best possible listening outcomes. So when you're looking at TLP Pro, that is always going to be paired with a wave system unless you opt to get one without, which of course could always be an option for you. Now let's talk about custom playlists a little bit. The custom playlists are the music listening therapy system of TLP with all of the core programs, with the supportive programs, and this is intended for a family's use at home or for a provider's personal use. And the great thing with custom playlists is you can order a complete system that has all of these programs included on it, or you can mix and match. So you can get one core program, two core programs, three or all four. You could get a core program plus Sleep Genius. You could get a core program plus Music for Babies. Really any combination that you like, you now have the opportunity to completely personalize that iPod for an individual client, for yourself, or for a complete family or household. So if you have multiple listeners in a household, they'll be able to work off that same iPod and have the correct program for themselves. So think of TLP Pro as the in-clinic system with a unlimited site license that you'll use in a clinic or a school for your personal use, to use as an adjunct to therapy, and to actually run clients through full programs if they're coming to you. And then custom playlists would be generally considered that personal use or at-home system that clients would have and that you might use for non-site use purposes. So that's the basic distinction, whereas TLP Pro comes with all of the programs on it. With custom playlists, you can order and build those exactly as you like. So I hope that that's fairly clear for you. And then we're going to walk through a bit more in relation to that. So just give me one moment. I'm going to bring up this PowerPoint for you. Okay, so looking at TLP Pro, as we've discussed, everything is included within that system. And we have multiple uses for that across different facilities and client types. With custom playlists, you have the ability to customize with different core programs plus supportive programs. Both are on the same iPod Touch device. Your core programs, of course, are Spectrum, Achieve, Level 1, and In Time. And then your supportive programs are Sleep Genius. And on Sleep Genius, this is important to know. Not only do you have the 4 sleep programs that were on Sleep Genius previously, you also have the relaxation program and power nap program that were only part of the app previously. But with custom playlists, you now get the relaxation and power nap included on your Sleep Genius playlist. So that's important to note. With Sound Health, you're getting all 10 of the Sound Health albums. With Music for Babies, you're getting all 4 Music for Babies albums. Then there are 10 TLP specialized albums. So with custom playlists, you can choose one or a few or all of them. Whereas on Pro, again, that's going to include everything on it. When ordering a custom playlist system, generally we'll default to making that available with a wave system, but you could also order it without. So if you already have headphones, you can order that iPod Touch just on its own, or with a standard pair of air conduction headphones, however you choose. Okay, Sheila, anything that you want to add to what we've discussed so far?
Only that, I've talked to, I myself am still struggling with using all sorts of different programs on different devices and trying to find them. And I'm very eager to get a custom playlist myself. And in speaking with some of my colleagues who do have it, they just have stressed how much easier it is for them as every single day of their work.
Yeah.
So I think that is something for us to really think about as providers, as well as thinking about the people who we're serving, whether we're thinking about families or individual listeners.
Yeah. And something important, and let's go ahead, and I'm going to pull up some more information. Just give me a minute here. I'm going to do another screen share. But I want to kind of walk through what your resources are when ordering the custom playlist. TLP Pro is straightforward. You just call and order TLP Pro with or without waves. So that's the option. When you are ordering custom playlists, you have a number of different options. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through those with you now. Okay, so what I have up on the screen now, and Sheila, will you just confirm for me that what you see is build your TLP system?
Yep, right down to just beneath headphones and accessories.
Perfect. So when we release custom playlists, we send an email out to all of our providers with these order forms. And there's different versions of the order form. So I just want to walk through at a high level. And everything I'm showing you are for providers served by ABT. If you're working with one of our international representatives, your pricing is going to vary based on the country that you're in and currency conversion and so forth. But this is for general reference. So you get a custom playlist order form, and this one again is designed for you as a provider when you're ordering your own system or you're ordering a system for a client. So you start by deciding if you want a TLP system with waves or a TLP system with no headphones. Then you choose whether or not you wish to have 1, 2, 3, or 4 core programs, or you simply want the complete system fully loaded. And again, that's available for waves and without waves. Then when you select, say, one core program, you'd click on which program you like. So if I'm doing 1, and you'll see actually you can fill out this form online, or if I'm doing 2, I might want, say, Spectrum and Level 1 with 2 programs, or if I'm doing 3, Spectrum, Level 1, and In Time. Okay, and then supportive programs, you simply add, I want to add in Sleep Genius. I should add that with all core programs, at least through the end of the year, the Complete Sound Health Collection is included at no charge. So that's all 10 albums. So that should be made of note. If you want to add Music for Babies, any of the specialized albums, you would do that right here. Any additional headphones, and then you'd simply fill out your billing information, shipping information, payment information, and your details as a provider. So if you're ordering your system, you can either use this form or just call ABT or your international rep, and they'll walk you through this, but we thought you might enjoy having the convenience of having this form in hand. Now, you may also have prefer that your clients complete a form and then submit that to you. So this version of the form only has the retail pricing and not your provider price. So this form can be used for you to give your client and to complete your order with them. And then all of the billing, payment information, and provider information is there. And then the last version, if you're using Listener Direct, in which the client is going to place an order with us with your permission and pay us directly, then there is also this retail submit to ABT version of the form. So there are 3 different forms, and to keep it really simple, you can always simply call us to place your order. Sheila, as we look at that, any questions come to mind for you?
Yes. So what if somebody is just ordering one program and then they order another program later on? Is there a form for that, or what's the form and what's the procedure for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the nice things about custom playlists is you can, order the system as you like it initially, then add to it later. So say you want to start with Spectrum now and maybe add In Time at a later date. You send that system into ABT. and you purchase the program, and we reload it and we send it back to you. So you simply just call ABT to make that happen. And we'll take that order over the phone, and then we'll handle that processing. So there is no reload charge for a additional core program. And if you're ordering a core program and you want to add some other things at that time, you can. If you are simply adding on supportive programs, there would be a $50 programming fee to do that. But when you're ordering an additional core program, no added charge. But this is what's important to know. When you're ordering the programs initially, it is less expensive than to add them later. So the programs are more upfront than when you're adding at a later date. So it is a savings to do them in advance when you can.
But besides that, though, it seems to me that even comparing this custom playlist arrangement to our old arrangement, where we would perhaps have families buying multiple iPods, that there's a savings because they're not having to buy the equipment again.
That's
basically.
right. Not only the convenience of a single device, but they save that added device fee.
Yeah.
So that's one of the distinct advantages. So you have a family with multiple listeners on different programs, you can have each of those programs on the single device. Mm-hmm. And one thing that's important to know is you can just still call and order a Spectrum or an Achieve or a Level 1 or an In Time.
Right.
That hasn't changed. Just the way that the pricing is set up and the structure of doing that, because we can add additional programs, is a little bit different. And the other thing that's important is many of you are customized to ordering Level 1 Premium, or maybe just Level 1 or Level 1 Nature. So when you're ordering Level 1, that now is Level 1 and Level 1 Nature, and the corresponding preparatory listening that went with those, that is now considered Level 1. If you wanted the same iPod configuration as Level 1 Premium, you would buy Level 1, and then you would add on those additional albums for an additional fee. So Level 1 Premium, as it existed, is not a product option by name, but you can certainly build a custom playlist to resemble that same system. But just know Level 1 Nature are now considered Level 1, so you get both programs when you're ordering a Level 1 system.
That's great.
Great. Okay, so let's do also a quick terminology review. And again, this is just another level set as we're going through the additional information tonight, so that we're all on the same page with the terms that we're using. So forgive us, we know that this is a bit of a review, but I think it's important. As we know, there is a language to being a provider and a language to ABT. So let's just do that very, very quick review right now. So first of all, core programs, when we refer to a core program, that would be Spectrum, Achieve, Level 1, or In Time. When we refer to supportive programs, that would be Sleep Genius, Sound Health, Music for Babies, or the TLP Specialized albums. So that's what we mean by core program or supportive program. And we're going to be updating our training courses also to reflect this same language. Also tonight, we're going to be talking about program paths. So a program path is a planned structure of programs which takes a listener through a long-term listening progression directed to help them achieve their goals. So for example, a program path would be Spectrum to Level 1 or Spectrum to In Time to Level 1. We would call that a program path. Module is very fundamental to our language. So we know a module in the listening program is 15 minutes, and In Time it's 9 minutes. And it encompasses the ABC modular design of the warm up, the workout, or the cool down, or the accommodation, the training, or the integration phase of listening. When we refer to schedules for the listening program, extended is once a day for 15 minutes, base is twice a day for 15, condensed is once for 30, and advanced is 2 30-minute sessions a day for a total of 60 minutes. And in time, the same concept extended is one 9-minute module, bass is two 9-minute modules, condensed is two 9-minute modules combined, and advanced would be four 9-minute modules. So far, so good, Sheila?
Yes, and I'm glad that you're going over the schedules, because just when we're talking about customizing a program, and we're talking about just what we can do with one program itself and how we're going to be customizing that for an individual, the schedules are an important part of that. And I think it's really important when we're using the terminology to help explain that to families, and also enable them to find with clarity what they are following when they go online, perhaps, and look at the listening logs.
Yeah, absolutely. Other references are listener groups. Our learning group, which would be in the listener group, is where we would categorize the purpose for our client to be listening. So where do they fit? Are they listening for primarily learning purposes to support attention, scholastic, or study skills? For communication support for listening, language, voice, speech, and communication? Or are they intervention, meaning that they need therapeutic intervention? This is a rehabilitative application. There's neurodevelopmental or other sensory needs. Or a wellness listener. This may be an adult or a young adult that's simply listening for a healthy life balance of mind, body, emotion, and spirit. Or performance, peak performance, higher states of physical, mental, musical, or creative abilities. So when we talk about listener groups, that's what we're referring to. Other terms that we talk about are the brain focus areas. So what areas of brain function are we really focused on for listening? Are we working on executive function, communication, auditory processing, social emotional function, stress response, motor coordination, or creativity? And this comes into play as we think about listening cycles and the listener group, where we've established some minimum listening, recommended minimum listening for foundational listening skills. So with our learning group, we'd like to see at least 2 cycles or a 50-hour baseline with TLP. Same with communication, wellness, or performance. And then generally with our intervention listeners, we're going to do a minimum of 4 cycles of listening to establish that path. And then the other one that we're just going to finish up on are the frequency zones. So the frequency zones corresponding to our color coding system, the blue zone, which would be the full range of frequencies from 20 to 20,000 hertz, the green zone, which would be considered our low frequency training or the body zone, our orange zone, which is the mid frequency training, which is the zone of language and communication, or the red zone, which is the mid to high frequencies, which is the energizing zone of creativity and higher level functions. So just a quick review, again, to give us a baseline and level set for tonight. Any comments or additions there, Sheila?
Only that, I think this whole aspect of zone training is really an important consideration that we need to keep in mind all the time, because whatever core program we're using has that zone training element to it, while there are other things that perhaps are also emphasized. Those frequency zones and the understanding of the progression from one to the other, and what is emphasized in different programs, is certainly a very key consideration in what you're going to determine for your primary core program when you're ordering a system.
Yeah, so that's a great segue, Sheila. So let's talk about how we really incorporate TLP Pro and custom playlists into your practice. You've been a provider since almost day one. I remember that very first training course in New Jersey where you raised your hand and said, however I can help, in 1999. And every
I still think of that.
I remind you, here you are. Be careful what you offer. We'll take you up on it, providers.
For the rest of your life.
For the rest of your life.
It's like church.
You're in. So, what I appreciate is that you have worked with countless listeners. Not only, your emphasis is a pediatric OT, but you also work with young adults and adults. So you work across the lifespan. You work from very low functioning clients, what I would call the hurt clients, to very, very high functioning individuals. You've been trained in other methods. You've co-developed a lot of the work that we've done with us. So these programs inside and out. You work with them daily as a therapist. So I'm really going to be turning this time and discussion to you to talk about how we select core programs to match client needs, right? So we know what custom playlists to order or what programs to work with on our TLP Pro system. And then we'll just kind of go from there.
Sure. Okay. What I'd like to start out saying is to just bring our attention to the fact that regardless of whatever program we're using, we should be considering those acoustic elements that we've got available within the music to use to support change. Frequency is one of them. We've already touched upon that a little bit. Volume or strength and the dynamic use of volume changes that we have with audio bursting. Time or temporality is another one, and spatiality is another. So those 4 acoustic elements are really key to what we're doing in time, regardless of what the program is. And some programs have more of an emphasis on certain elements than others, and that's an important consideration when we're thinking about client needs. Now, most of us, because we've been trained with level 1, and I'm sure there are a number of people who are here on the webinar who have been using level 1 to the extent that that's what they call TLP. Those providers, as well as even myself, just have basically done a lot of programming with the emphasis on the frequencies, zones, and the functions that we have come to associate with those frequency zones, largely by the very pioneering work of Dr. Tomatis. So that whole idea of frequency and function is still very much in the forefront of our decision making, and really helps determine what core program that we're using. Now, of course, when you put something like In Time in there, In Time does have that same sort of frequency format, although the progressions are a little different. But In Time is a program that really emphasizes that temporal structure of sound a whole lot more, with its emphasis on beat and rhythm. So for myself, when I'm deciding what I'm going to do with a client, I'm really looking at what their needs are and what acoustic elements I can really use in order to help meet those needs with a music program. So when I'm going about picking a program, and now as an OT, I certainly see a lot of people with sensory sensitivities, especially a lot of people with sound sensitivities. So that is a very primary consideration. And when we have that, we've taken a lot of the guesswork out of it for providers, in that there's a program that's specifically designed for that. So as far as I'm concerned, when I've got somebody who's coming in, their presenting problem is at the very basis, because they don't have a comfortable relationship with sound, then I'm thinking spectrum immediately.
Right.
I will say, though, that before we had spectrum, we certainly had a lot of good results with using level 1 to approach sound sensitivities too, but it's not the program that is specifically designed for that purpose. So I do think about that a lot, and that's those of us who've been trained in all the different programs can go back and refresh ourselves with the zone progression of the Spectrum program, and how it differs from something like the Achieve program, where the emphasis is really very much different, because we're targeting areas related to executive function, related to attention, related to concentration, language use, communication, with the understanding that the sensory sensitivities and the foundational green zone, if you want to call it that, functions are really looking pretty good, and we're ready to move on. You know, what I find helpful as a very quick reference for that, and that I use when I'm explaining my programming choices to families, is I just compare listening logs between the programs. And it's very nice to use those listening logs as a really effective description of what we're doing in terms of frequency progressions, because of the color coding there. So, and then of course, level 1 and In Time are very much general programs. And for myself, I really like the idea of level 1 and In Time, because they are such balanced programs. And you know, I happen to find that for myself, if you were to ask me which programs I use the most, I would have to say that I use Spectrum level 1 and In Time the most initially. And there I can right now only think of one person who I have ever started with an Achieve program. However, I'm sure there are speech pathologists who are listening, who are targeting, or teachers, or musicians, or people involved with vocal coaching, or musicians, or any other professions where they're seeing a different kind of presenting group and are looking at the zones that are relating to those people's areas of performance, areas of need, areas of goals, as you were talking about before, in terms of both the listener groups and the brain focus areas. So how I like to think about customizing a program is, first of all, what we can do in terms of customizing within one program.
Right.
Because even though each one of the programs has a very distinct progression that can be followed, there are plenty of ways in which we can customize. Now, for Spectrum and Achieve, those two programs are very specifically laid out module by module. But you know, we can still be looking at the schedule as a way of customizing, and certainly time of day for listening, whether or not there are going to be any other supportive programs that are used in addition, or activities that are going to be used. So we've got some different ways in which we can make that program very unique to the individual, including, if we're doing with using these custom playlists, backtracking if we need to, or repeating. And I'll tell you, I end up doing that kind of thing a lot, where I do keep the progression in mind, and everybody always follows that progression. But if somebody has had a really successful week with the modules that they've listened to, and the family might want to repeat it, I'm all for it. Or similarly, if it's been a rather stressful week, and my hunch is that, you know what, maybe we need a little bit more time on some of these modules, we might go back and repeat some of them. So honoring the progression is first and foremost important, but there is opportunity for customizing within those two programs. And then when it comes to level 1, certainly there's a wide variety of what can be done with that program. The foundational listening experience, pretty much the same kinds of things as I just talked about with Spectrum and Achieve. But what I really appreciate about level 1 is that after that foundational listening experience has been provided, there are so many different ways in which you can be using that program, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And the same goes with In Time. In fact, within Time, we actually have different protocols that you can choose from. So between selecting a schedule and deciding which protocol you're going to be using, you're really individualizing your program choice for your listener. I love the idea that with the custom playlists, that family members who are listening can choose to have different programs depending upon what their needs are. Now, if I had a family that was going to be having multiple listeners listening, and they could only afford to buy one program, and I'm having to think about what that program is going to be, chances are I would probably pick level 1, because I think it's it is exceptionally versatile, and it seems like the classical music genre has the widest appeal to all different age groups. As much as I believe in Time, I do recognize that there are some listeners who have not had the experience of listening to percussive music. And it's not just the world music genre there, it's the whole idea that you're listening to music that's created by a variety of different drums and other percussive instruments. And that's something that's new to a lot of people. So oftentimes starting with a genre that is more familiar is very helpful. That familiarity does make a difference. However, on the other hand, personal preference, as we always say, plays a big part in what we're doing. And if I'm trying out different programs with different people and they have a real strong connection with the rhythmic music, then that is really pointing me in that direction. Along those same lines, if I'm trying to make a decision about whether or not which I'm going to choose, level 1 or In Time, if I have somebody who has very strong characteristics related to beat and rhythm, like, for example, I notice that they have a lot of rhythmic behavior, or they do a lot of counting, or they love a lot of rote sequences. They seek out repetitive movements. They'll tell you that they really enjoy rhythmic music. They love to dance. Like, rhythm and beat are a very important part of their life. Then I'm going to be really thinking about In Time for them. Similarly, if I have somebody who is like very, very lacking in the beat and rhythm department, I'm also going to be thinking about that.
Right.
Sometimes those people don't really like In Time yet, because it's not exactly where they're at, but they might grow into that, as we're going to be talking about with programs that move on. But I kind of think about it in the same way that I think about how, when we're treating somebody who has hypo-responsivity or hyper-responsivity, very oftentimes the treatment modality is very similar for either end of that extreme. And I do see that within Time as well. So, I love the fact that we have these 4 core programs, and that between the 4 of them, I think that we can truly say that there is something there for just about everybody.
Yeah.
Whether and I really mean everybody, whether we're talking about remediation, wellness, or performance, and whatever the needs are. So I'm very happy about the just continuing the emphasis on what I like to consider a primary core program. What I'm going to start out with somebody first. And I'd just like to add to that, that for the most part, my listeners are all, I'm viewing each and every one of them as lifelong listeners. How they go about doing that is very personalized with them. Some of them have have been listening for years and years. Others listen for a while and take a break. I have some families who are so excited about this idea of custom playlists, but then they want to know what they're going to be doing with all their devices that they already have.
Right.
So, and the new ones, it just, when I talk about custom playlists, this really makes some sense to them, because they're beginning to understand how we're using music, how we're using this enhanced music to support their needs at a variety of different levels. Using it first in a foundational sense to really lay a foundation of a very well-balanced listening experience that we can build from, an experience that's really going to change how they're listening to music, how they're taking in beat and rhythm information. And then going from that foundational level to really honing in on very specific functions and really molding a program that is very, very specific to addressing those functions. And then taking that even one step further, now that we have all these tools, we can also use some of these core programs to, in a supportive way, to help performance during tasks, which is a very different kind of thing, because, you know, when we talk about doing listening, we're always talking about, you know, creating a comfortable environment, making it so that the listening is the activity that's there and everything else is just supporting it. But, you know, I have so many families who will say, you know, can't he listen and read at the same time? Because he reads so much more when he's listening to the music, and he really wants to do that. And, you know, I will say, no, we're not ready for that yet. Right now, we're not combining those two things.
Right. But later we can. So we get our foundational listening. So it's the context. There's following your listening program, going through your schedule, laying that foundation, then using the modules in the programs as enhancements for other things to help support adjunctively. You know, if you find that you've got a electric reader and all of a sudden you put on the headphones, and with the orange zone, they'll read for an hour straight. Great. Let's do that once we've got that foundation laid.
Absolutely. And, you know, we were talking a little bit about cycles earlier, and I do want to stress that, that whole idea of the cycles with regard to the foundation. And very strongly encouraging people to do at least 2 cycles of a core program. And then considering what's going to happen after that. And, you know, you really can't decide what you're going to be doing next until, I think anyway, until you've seen what the response has been to the program, and you assess what those needs are at that time. You know, we can make some pretty good guesses about what people are going to need, in terms of, like you were saying before, buying those programs initially because they're going to save. But as far as what you're exactly going to do next and how you're going to use those programs after that foundational listening experience has been there, I think is, you know, really a very important role of the provider. And it's, it really, I think, puts the onus on us to really know the products very well And I don't mean just what's on the listening logs about them or what we remember from program options. I am talking about our own personal use
Right.
and understanding what it sounds like to be listening, what it feels like to be going through these programs. So, just another plug for everybody doing their own listening and finding their own progressions themselves.
So Sheila, could
Yes.
you walk us through some of the more typical core program progressions? Would now be a good time to do that?
Yes. Let me. I'm going to now share some notes of mine with everybody, if that's okay, and just give me a minute to do that. Alex, can you see this now?
Yep, you're great. Just scroll up to the top.
All right, good. Okay, so we're going to start with spectrum 2 in time, and that's kind of a selfish starting place.
I can't imagine why you'd start here.
I do this a lot.
The other way.
I find if I'm not starting with in time, I'm starting with spectrum and moving into in time. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, and somebody's got sensory sensitivities, specifically sound sensitivities, or there's somebody who's just terribly dysregulated because of those kinds of protective responses that they have to sound stimulation. That the first goal is to get them comfortable enough so that they're moving past that point of being protective, that they're moving out of that very uncontrolled fight or flight instinct that they have in response to the stimulation around them. And I happen to really appreciate the very gradual gradation of the complexity of spectrum. And as you well know, I am a huge believer in emphasizing low frequencies to help reduce sound sensitivities in order to help get the middle ear system more efficient, and also to be able to ground people and bring them more in touch with their bodies and their body function. So I love the idea that spectrum has a very strong low frequency emphasis, and I get really excited about following up spectrum within time, because even though in time has the full spectrum of frequencies that are emphasized at different times, there's inherently a lot of low frequency stimulation in time.
Well, and I just want to interject, all of the programs, move through the 4 zones. So it's about the intensity of that stimulation and the amount of time we're working within.
Yes.
And, spectrum is right, very green zone oriented, but we're also starting in blue zone and moving through orange and red as well with green support. And in time, we happen to typically begin foundationally in the green zone.
That's right.
With the low frequencies, then proceed through orange, red, and blue. So they all have that balance, but it's always about the emphasis within the program.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, some of most of the modules begin with a lot of grounding low, relatively speaking, even though it's full spectrum in those first 3 minutes, a lot of grounding low frequency influence within time. And we can use that to really help develop our own body awareness, because that idea of using low frequencies with bone conducted sound is especially stimulating to the vestibular system. So when you combine spectrum within time, got a really nice, and the wave system, we've got a really nice program for offering, for activating the vestibular system. So the other piece to that, of course, is that it's rhythmic music, and you're going to hear me talking about this again and again, and that we know that rhythmic music stimulates rhythmic movement from infancy on up. So this idea of getting somebody comfortable with listening and then encouraging more body involvement, and also at the same time through the percussive sound, providing relatively speaking, more clearly discernible patterns of sound that we're listening to, just because it's easier to pay attention to patterns when it's percussion. Really helps us move the client from protection into discrimination in a really, I think, very effective way, because it's easier to see to hear some of those differences, and also to feel it in the body as well. So that's a program that I really use a lot for rehab or intervention purposes. But I also really feel like it's so foundational for other listener groups as well. You know, I would not discount this for somebody who has primary communication needs, for example. And we might be thinking, oh, communication, orange zone. But you know what? If they're not communicating because they have withdrawn or they're avoiding, then we've really still got to clear that up first.
Right.
And so I feel like this is a really nice way of being able to do that. In looking at spectrum to level 1, this is also something that I recommend a lot. And where I would make this choice to go to level 1 here instead of in time is primarily if, well, first of all, if the person who's listening has really responded nicely to the classical music, and we don't want to introduce something more novel, we want to keep going with what has worked, then I really love the idea of moving into level 1. I like, once again, you're going to hear me say over and over again, I just love the balanced, well-rounded stimulation that level 1 provides. And I think that going from the more gradual gradation of spectrum, and with its very unique spatial characteristics, into level 1, where we've got that combination of spatial surround and spatial surround dynamic, is a very, very interesting and helpful way of providing an ongoing progression that hopefully is going to affect performance in a variety of different ways, but especially take that person from from a place of becoming more comfortable with sound to then, okay, now here's this wide range of stimulation. What is your system going to do with it now that you're ready for it? So I really value this progression a lot. Like I was saying, this whole idea of listener preference really means a lot when we're talking about what we're going to be doing when we're planning for moving from one program to another. You know, novelty is something that could work for you, or it couldn't. You know, oftentimes we talk about novelty because it's great for brain change. The brain likes novel kinds of things and pays attention to it in a special kind of a way. But on the other hand, sometimes we know that there's a time and a place for everything, and you can't necessarily change what they're used to listening to and expect the results to continue. You know, you might have a little bit of a backslide. So lots of different things to take into account when we're going from spectrum to level 1 or to in time. Uh, I'd like to talk about the progression of either in time to level 1 or level 1 to in time.
Great.
There's, I guess the best way to start this out is to once again just stress what it is that the person likes to listen to, and to be able to experiment with both. Another great reason for us as providers having these two programs, at least these two programs on our devices, because you're really going to want to check out the personal preferences. But I would say that one of the main differences here is that, while we have had some luck with some sensory sensitive listeners within time, In Time was not a program that was developed for somebody with sound sensitivities.
Right.
And while level 1, like I was saying before, it wasn't developed for that, but we really were able to use level 1 very nicely with sound sensitive listeners. So if we're looking for general programs, and we've got somebody who may have some sound sensitivities, I would definitely go with level 1 over in time there. But, and again, I would consider in time first and foremost if those rhythm needs or beat related needs are right there. So, looking at what's more primary, is the primary need more with rhythm awareness and timing, or is it looking at those frequency and function relationships and being able to have a program that is going to address in a very well-rounded way all of those functions from green, from full spectrum up through lows, mids, and high frequencies and all that's associated with them. Level 1 does that. It's a tried and true, I think. We've got a program that has worked very well for thousands of people for years, and there's something to be considered with that. However, I will say that I like the idea of going from level 1 to in time, because I feel like level 1 doesn't quite stimulate the body movement the way in time does. And right. I really like that idea of being able to really stimulate the auditory system and all its direct and indirect pathways, and then really make that connection between auditory and motor, because it is just so incredibly important in all of our functions. So I really like that idea of progression. One of the things that I think is very interesting to think about, and I've had a couple of families who have done this because they had already had level 1 and then started with in time, is this idea of cross training. And there are lots of different ways to be approaching that, and I really value that primarily because just through my own experience and knowing other people who have cross-trained it with a variety of different kinds of fitness approaches, seeing the differences that's made for them, really got me thinking about how we could be using these two very different programs with the appreciation of their common frequency basis to really try to be more aggressive with change. This is my own personal thought. I see that as being more intensive and a little bit more aggressive than if we were just doing one program or the other. I think it takes, somebody who with a fair degree of willingness to adapt to be going from one program to the other in however we decide to cross-train with it. And that's something that if we were to do another webinar about this, I would really get into some specifics about cross-training.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that because, we've always done shouldn't say always. There's been an element of cross training in module combination zones.
True.
And we built that into Spectrum, and we built that into Achieve, where in Spectrum you will do green zone with orange zone in a day, or green with red, so that we have that foundation supporting the higher frequencies, and we do some of that in Achieve. And our more experienced providers have kind of mixed and matched with specialized albums,
Right.
complementing level one, so say using an SI Kids or an SI Classic as you're going through the orange zone of level one to give more green foundation with some added novelty. And I have one case that I've worked with, and this is important to think about lifelong listeners. So this is a little boy in Italy that has a chromosome anomaly, trisomy 18, mosaicism. And we had to start, because of his very, very involved kids, with Spectrum. And we did 4 cycles of Spectrum. Then we moved him to to level one. And we ended up doing 4 cycles of actual level one. And he was really growing and growing, but then he kind of peaked. And then we had to add needed some novelty to his program. So we then introduced In Time.
Yeah.
And we moved him through In Time. We started cross training, because there was a time to do that with level one and In Time in the same day.
Great.
Combining those. So I've seen that work really well. And the novelty does become important when you have a listener that's been going for a long time.
Absolutely.
You need something to shift the system and challenge it a bit more when you start to see plateaus.
Yes. I have definitely seen the same kind of thing with people who have been long-term listeners with level one, and then they have gone into In Time. And I've often wondered, like, is it the program or is it the different kind of stimulation? And
sure.
I mean, who's to
we
say?
work with what we've got, but
yes,
working.
But I think, you bring up an important distinction, Alex, and that is, the kind of cross-training that we would refer to when we're talking about cross-training with different frequency zone emphasis, and compared to cross-training with 2 very different kinds of programs.
Right.
And taking that frequency emphasis as what's then the commonality there. So it's I think a really exciting area to investigate and dialogue more about, and I'm really interested in hearing what other people have perhaps done with that.
Yeah, well, on that, when we get to Q&A, if you just will let us know your interest in some more advanced programming with cross-training, if you'd like that topic, then we perhaps can do a dedicated webinar to that. So give us some feedback as we get to the end, please.
And just real quick, I mean, some of this is kind of redundant, but I think the important thing in talking about moving from Achieve to level one or Achieve to In Time is the recognition that somebody might be starting out really with a program choice that has really concentrated its emphasis on frequencies associated with auditory processing, attention, concentration, executive function, creativity, all of that kind of stuff. But they may, in fact, after that, really be ready to go deeper into the whole spectrum of frequency stimulation. And one thing I will add, speaking from experience, in one particular case with somebody who had done Achieve and had made some very nice changes in terms of communication, especially with vocabulary and self-expression, but really was still not taking turns in conversation and recognize, kind of like right now when I'm doing with just continuing talking, I need to be listening to a time to remind me that there's a pattern here and we should be taking turns and I've got to stop. But pulling in something that was that had more of a temporal influence really, I think, brought this listener's awareness to how she was communicating in time, what she was doing with her ability to use language, and she became much more aware of who was talking and when to talk and how much to say, and it was very, very exciting to see that. So I think that there's great value for moving from Achieve to one of these more general programs. And some people may think, well, that's kind of counterintuitive if already Achieve is up on the orange zone level. It's not like that. Yes, it's higher frequency, but it's not necessarily a higher in the grand scheme of things. I don't quite know.
Well, let me reference that. I think just level set, Spectrum and Achieve, the modules are lower intensity levels.
Yes.
So all of the acoustic elements, the filtration, the audio bursting, what's happening with the timing of spatial dynamics are at a lower intensity level, so that the most intensive Spectrum or Achieve module is not as strong as any level 1 module. So there's a big jump in challenge for the listeners when you go to level 1. So that's kind of the big distinction. Spectrum and Achieve are music only. Level 1, we have music only and music with nature. So there's a lot more dynamic element to that. So it isn't apples to apples. We have the same structure, ABC design, 4 zones, filters, audio bursting, spatial dynamics, but the intensity gradients in those are quite different from each other, just as it is within time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important consideration, because sometimes I think people can misunderstand that, because there's that jump up to orange, and you think that it's perhaps more advanced, but
no,
it's not.
Much lower intensity. So the strongest orange or red in Achieve or Spectrum are considerably lower intensity than level 1. Yeah. Sheila, we talked about doing some advanced programming, and we've already broken our hour mark. I had a feeling we might do that. This is great, so I want to keep the dialogue flowing. So we hope you'll hang on with us, those that are on the live call right now. But why don't we get into kind of one of your more advanced protocols?
Okay.
Where
I can do this one relatively quickly, because I've got a good concise power screen for that.
Great. And again, just a reminder, those of you that are on the webinar, if you didn't join us in the beginning, as we get close to the end here, we're going to allow time for Q&A. So stand by, jot down any questions you have, and Sheila and I will stay on to address those for you.
Sorry, hold on a second.
You're fine.
Okay, so, oh shoot, what happened here?
Yeah, if you close that and maximize this one, would be great.
All right. Okay, so as I was saying before, I love the low frequencies. I happen to work with a population that really benefits from really targeting low frequencies. And yet, for as much as I value low frequency stimulation, I really value a well-rounded foundational listening experience. And so even though we've got Spectrum that emphasizes the low frequencies, it's still a very well-rounded program. So the whole idea, to just backtrack a bit, when we're creating that foundational listening experience with our primary core program, it is a very it's a well-rounded program, and it's meant to be the basis that we're going to climb from for weeks, months, years to come.
Right.
So,
They're designed to stand alone,
yep,
and we have the option to combine programs and progress to other ones. And
sure.
it's always
So
fun
for
in the
something
very
like
nature of the
this
programs.
path, what we would do is first have a foundational listening experience, and it could be with spectrum, it could be with it could be with in time, it could be with level 1, but the whole idea here is that coming off of the foundational listening experience, I, as a provider, am thinking to myself, okay, and with information from the listener and or his parents, teachers, significant people in his life, what are the needs that we really need to be addressing now, and what happened in that foundational listening time? And so if one of the things that comes to mind is, gee, you know what, this child is still very dysregulated, then I'm going to think about why is it, and chances are that he or she is going to be seeking movement, having a short attention span because there's a drive or a craving for movement, that kind of thing. Lots of very low frequency body involvement. So this is a progression that such a listener could follow if we were going to get really advanced, really tricky, and really involving multiple programs. But I have to say that Alex reminds me all the time that we don't have to get tricky just because we can. But here, this is getting tricky because we can, and because we've got a lot of different options. But I do want to say this in a kind of a different way, even though right in this progression here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different products that I've mentioned. I believe from the bottom of my heart that one of the best things about ABT products is that we can really create a very simple, useful, cost-effective program for just about anybody.
Yeah.
And we can do that with one program, or we can do that with a path that gets increasingly complicated and increasingly long-term out. So if we were doing something, for example, that was going to target the low frequencies, then we could, after that foundational listening experience and maybe something else, we could then go into spectrum, spend 3 weeks on spectrum. Again, why are we starting here? Because we're building in intensity. We're starting out with something that's really quite easy. And why modules 21 through 50? Because we've skipped over the full spectrum ones, and we've moved right into the green zone ones. Then moving into SI Kids, then on to In Time Album 1, which is the In Time album that features the low frequencies. Then Level 1, Album 3, a low frequency album. Then In Time Album 5, also low frequency, and except with combined instrumentation. And then with Level 1, Album 4, the spatially dynamic low frequency album.
Right.
So we've got a very nice progression that is really comprehensive in terms of its use of those acoustic elements that we were referring to at the beginning. And I happen to really like this path a lot. And I also really like the idea of creating these paths for each of the frequency zones, the mids, the highs, full spectrum, and also taking a look at what we can do to create paths that involve and emphasize spatiality. So there's lots of different ways that we can get really advanced with these paths. And
Well, this is a great start, and just pragmatically, if you've got a TLP Pro system, you've got everything you need on the system to do this low frequency path. If you order a custom playlist complete, you have everything, or you do a custom playlist that has Level 1, In Time and Spectrum, and then you add the SI Kid specialized album. So that would be an example of what you need to have on that iPod Touch in order to follow this particular low frequency path.
Yeah, and then I just have to add what's also so great about that, to just remind people that that level one also includes level one nature.
Yeah.
So what we could do, I mean, I'm sure your wheels are turning like mine are right now with just the so many different directions we could go once we think about adding that in as well. So, but I'll be quiet because I'm not going to get even trickier because I can.
Again, if there's enough interest, I know you've got a lot of these progressions that you follow.
Yeah, I would love to share them
different
sometime.
models, and we're very happy to do a follow-up webinar for everybody to go a little bit deeper. Sheila, thank you for sharing that. And if you stop sharing your screen, I think, to recap, this webinar has really been about introducing custom playlists, introducing TLP Pro, TLP Pro being the in-clinic system with unlimited site license and the programs on it, and custom playlists is how we simply order an iPod now. And just very practically, both come on the iPod Touch. And on this iPod Touch, if I select music, you're going to see that I have different playlists here. So I have In Time, TLP Achieve. I happen to have here some of the Sleep Genius tracks, the relaxation program, the power nap, music for babies, TLP Level 1 and Level 1 Nature. And as I go through this library, everything that's available to order from ABT is right here on a single device. So it's very easy to put together these kind of program paths very, very easily on that iPod. So it's small, easy to use, and
it's also just so amazing to see all of that on one device.
Well, if we think about, you and I come from the CD days.
Yes.
And how many CDs are stacked on the device? That's the beauty of technology, right?
The CDs are still available, though, right? If people want that.
We will keep making them as long as there's enough demand for them. Yeah, so we still have Level 1 and Level 1 Nature and music for babies and sound health and everything that has been available on CD with the exception of Classic. We have downloads now for sound health and music for babies, so you can actually download those off our website if you don't want to do CDs. So all kinds of new ways to access your programs. So let's go ahead and move to Q&A now that we've kind of closed off this section of the webinar. But before we do that, Sheila, just any closing thoughts or comments you want to share with our providers?
No.
Okay, great. So those of you that are joining us tonight, thank you very much. Great to have you. And we have a Q&A option on the bottom. And if you just want to type in any questions that you have, then Sheila or I, or together, will be very happy to answer those for you. So the floor is yours. And if we don't get any questions, then I'm going to assume that we just answered everything you were thinking about on the call.
Either that or everybody's just gone to sleep already.
Fantastic, or otherwise. You can always call into ABT or email us. And hey, we've got a question. So we're going to answer this live. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name because it's abbreviated, but the question is, where would you start if you have a client who is on a really tight budget? And that's a common one we get every day, Sheila. So you can have one core program that's going to be as versatile as possible. How are you going to approach that?
I would have to say Level 1. As much as I would like to say In Time, I can't say it. I have those situations a lot, and Level 1 is the core program that I would very strongly recommend. Yeah. The other consideration is what you might be able to do with with the specialized albums that are part of the supportive program, but I would very strongly recommend that you pursue different options related to financing to try to get a core program, because having the structure of that program makes a tremendous difference in terms of compliance. And you know, I honestly have people who have had their level 1 programs for as long as level 1 has been a program, and they're still using them.
Over 13 years now.
Yeah, it's
for
amazing.
level 1. Yeah.
So they have definitely gotten their money's worth out
Absolutely.
of it. And it's a tremendous value, in my opinion.
So thank you, Sheila. And we've heard from that provider, and that's exactly what they needed from you. So thank you so much. So when a child's young, how often, you know, so think of a young child, Sheila, and they've got this whole life ahead of them. How often would you think about repeating listening with them as they're growing and developing at different ages and stages of their life?
You mean how often would I have them go through a program?
Yeah. How would you approach that? You know, you've got a, let's say a child's, we'll use my son Brendan, right? Yeah. He listened in utero. He did 2 cycles with Mandy in utero. When he was 12 months old, we started a formal listening protocol with him. At that time, working with level 1, it would have been Spectrum, but it didn't exist yet. And he has continued his listening now at almost age 8, and we take some time off, but you know, we are continuing listening with different programs because they're all at our disposal. He's done In Time, he's done Spectrum, he's done level 1, he's done movement program, and various combinations of these things together. But how do you approach that? Maybe, you know, talking to a family with a younger child, looking toward their future as they're making an investment in a listening system today.
I talk about it as being a long-term endeavor, even though we're talking about programs that can be finite in terms of their length. Very rarely do I have somebody who is just going through a couple of cycles and then calling it quits, especially if they're younger and it's really dependent upon the parent to make sure that it happens, because the kid's just going to go along with it if the parent can create the routine, and if they are ready to, you know, given headphone compliance and all that tolerance and all that kind of stuff is there. I really like it to be really considered to be an essential part of brain and body nutrition for those, I don't know, beginning years. I mean, it sounds kind of optimistic about that. What I find is that, you know, I will always be one who will advocate for a break if a break is needed for compliance sake, whether it's because the parents need a break from just keeping it going or the kids need a break. Certainly when the kids are older, then it is different. Sometimes they do need to stop. And oftentimes it's in stopping that we see that performance is really better when they're listening. And when we see that happening, where things are looking good, quite good, relatively speaking, when somebody's listening, and then they stop listening for a while, and then there's a very obvious need to go back on, that's telling me we really do need to keep this up. And, you know, I don't know if you've faced this yet with Brendan, but I see this a lot with the children and also the adults that I work with is, you know, life throws different stuff at you all the time. Either you're growing up or you're maybe growing old, but either way, you know, there are so many different challenges through the lifespan that we all encounter, whether it's for ourselves or with our listeners, that the listening really does become a big support there. And I think that taking that idea that we talked about earlier from using the stimulation to facilitate change, like back at the beginning, to then, okay, what is this really doing for us in our lives, and how is it supporting performance? And I think that, you know, for many of us who have listened for a long time, we recognize that it's a very valuable support to our lifestyle, just like regular exercises or getting enough sleep or drinking enough water, that kind of stuff. It's a very, very essential component.
Well,
and that's how I present it.
well, as you know from Healing at the Speed of Sound, I really believe that this is foundational. That our listening and sound in our environment is a pillar of our health. So it's an essential nutrient, and we grow and change in response to our environment, and we adapt or maladapt to what's happening around us. But stressful events come up. Transitions are important times to think about bringing listening back. So
growth spurts are big.
Growth spurts, hormonal changes for children as well as adults.
Adults, yeah.
Major life traumas we all experience with family members and ourselves. So it is a great support in challenging times, and a great way for us to stay regulated in a world that is very difficult to do that in today. And I think we take it for granted. We're all healthy, functioning, normal adults. Everyone's got stuff. And
I do have to add to that because, I don't just think about in time this way. I think about all of the programs this way, in that you talk about maintaining our regulation. I really view music as our daily dose of synchrony, whether we're, and it doesn't have to be percussive music, or it doesn't have to be the music of in time. The whole idea behind music is that everything that's going on in it syncs up in time. Yeah. And we don't have a lot of that always in our lives. And so just knowing that you have that kind of stimulation every day, where you're putting the headphones on and what you're listening to has been put together to fit together in time, and that all those other elements of sound have also been enhanced in some way. I mean, it's incredibly powerful stimulation, and it's just so important for all of us.
And we didn't get into tonight, as we think about building a custom playlist or working with your own pro system as a provider. So if your client isn't sleeping, you put Sleep Genius on that playlist and use that at night. If we need supports during homework or to improve the environment, we want to add Sound Health and have that Sound Health collection on there. If we have a younger sibling in the household, you have an older kid and there happens to be a baby in the house, well, go ahead and get music for babies on there for that family member. So not just thinking about that one individual, but who else, as we're talking to our families about your listener, who else is in the family that might benefit from some of the supportive programs in addition to core programs, as long as we have them on a single device. And we've had Kylie may have missed this earlier in the webinar, but Sheila, what advice do you have for a nonverbal, low-functioning child on the spectrum in terms of program selection? Where would you go? Nonverbal, low-functioning kid on the spectrum.
All right, so Kylie, I'm assuming that kid probably has some sound sensitivities. Yes, no? If he or she does,
if they're on the spectrum, chances are highly likely that they're exhibiting sound sensitivities.
Yeah, and you know what? Even if they don't, I would go with spectrum as probably as a starting point there, because I like the idea of the gradual increase in the intensity. I like the idea of the low frequency emphasis, even if there's not the sound sensitivities. I really believe that the low frequencies play an important part in helping us improve our efficiency of our middle ear system, and chances are that that person needs that. So I would start with that. If that kid was coming to my clinic just to see what would happen, I would probably just see what he or she would do within time. But if right now I had to give you an answer, I would say go with Spectrum.
Okay. And if not sound sensitive, they were, but no longer exhibiting sound sensitivities. Any difference in your thinking?
Did she say how old that kid is?
Just young.
Young.
Younger, nonverbal. Well, she didn't. Younger, nonverbal.
Yeah, I would.
I don't know the age.
I would definitely try.
9 years old, Sheila.
Oh, 9. I would definitely try in time and see and just see what the response would be to it. And one of the reasons that I'm saying that is because, you know, sometimes the movement that is involved with the music and also that is stimulated in the person really helps create some of the interaction that ends up facilitating communication. And it's really nice to emphasize that. But again, you got to try it first.
What if he's low functioning enough he's unable to follow movement at this stage?
I think that in training value of in time, the whole idea of having a steady beat and structure of multiple rhythms or polyrhythms is a really important consideration for somebody like him. I think though that if for some reason, I mean, he's got to like the music.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm saying try both the programs. And this is probably one of those things where, you know, the obvious choice to not pick is Achieve. You know, I would not necessarily pick Achieve, even though you're bringing up the verbal issues. I wouldn't necessarily start there for him.
Okay, great. And Sheila, we're getting a lot of interest in the progressions that you put together in that low frequency example. And you and I talked as we were preparing for this that you know, maybe a more advanced protocol guide is in order, and that's something that we can expand on what we did here today in a webinar, but maybe also in written form for the
Sure, I'd love to do that.
Reference. So just to let you know, there's a lot of interest there. And Pat's asking a great question, and that's when Sleep Genius is loaded on the iTouch, how's the music delivered to the client? Seems the bone conduction headphones or AC would be cumbersome when someone's trying to fall asleep, and I agree. So if you're getting TLP Pro or you're getting a custom playlist and adding Sleep Genius, you've got a couple of options. What we'd recommend is you order the sleep phones with that, and sleep phones are going to give us the best possible outcomes with Sleep Genius because of the stereo nature of the neurosensory algorithms, what's happening with the multiband binaural beats, the brown and the pink noise, and the structure of the music. The ideal delivery system would be the sleep phones. So just add that for the family. And when you look at the custom playlist order form, you'll see that you can actually order the Sleep Genius or the sleep phones with them at that time.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, it looks like our questions have wound down, Sheila. So I think we're 90 minutes in. This would be a good time to go ahead and conclude tonight. We do have one more comment that's come in. If there are more than one child in the room, can you put Sleep Genius through speakers? You certainly can do it through speakers, so you could use a Bluetooth speaker system connected to that iTouch for delivery, or you can plug the speaker system into Sleep Genius. The music will still be very effective in the open sound field. All the technologies work their best when they're delivered through the sleep phones. So that will be our last question tonight. So thank you everyone that joined Sheila, Allen, and myself for our TLP Pro and custom playlist webinar tonight. We hope you got some good ideas about these programs and have a better understanding of them. We'll be following up with a more advanced programming webinar in the future, so we'll go ahead and get that outlined and let you know when that's scheduled. So Sheila, thanks very much for
Thank you, Alex,
doing
and
this
thank
with
you,
me.
everyone, for being a part of this tonight.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We sure appreciate you. Make it a great night.
We sure do.